Okay, so we're doing question 4A from Katrina's homework, estimating, calculating percent. First question says, how do you know 10% when you know 100% of something? So in our first one, we know that 100% is actually equal to 40 kilometers, they've told us, right? Now, one trick of this is if you look, I'm going to draw 10% underneath. 10%, whoops, pause that. Okay, again, 10%, if you notice, is one decimal place over, or there's one less zero to it, okay? So 10%, in a sense, is really 100% minus that zero. So that zero that's supposed to be there, I can't draw it because it'll zoom in. That zero is less than 10%. So a way of thinking of it is whatever the number is, because when we go from 100 to 10%, we tactically move the decimal over to the left one, we can take this number and move the decimal over to the left one. When we do that, when I move 40 and I move the decimal over 1, well, I now get the number 4.0, or as we would write it, 4 kilometers. So anytime you have 100% of something, you can find 10% easily by just moving the decimal to the left, just like I said. So our 40, we move the decimal to the left, and we got the number 4 instead of having our number 40. The next question says, explain how to use 10% to determine 40%. So that's our 4B. Well, now that we have 10%, and we know 10% is equal to 4 kilometers, well, I can just keep going up and doubling my amount. So if I do 10% plus 10%, I'm going to have 20%. And what that means is, because I know 10% is 4 plus 4, I have 8 kilometers. So if we go to our number line up here, we can actually start to fill it in. I know 20 is going to be 8 kilometers. All right, let's keep going. Let's add another 10% to 20. That would give me 30%. And that would be adding 4, because 4 is equal to 10%, to our 8. That gives me 12 kilometers. So I know 30% is now 12 kilometers. And finally, if we add one more 10% to 30, we would get 40%. And look at that. We add 4 kilometers to 12. That gives us what? 16 kilometers, which is exactly what they've given us here in our number line. If we look back up at the top, 40 was equal to 16 kilometers. So if we have 10% of something, and we can count by tens, okay? We know 10 plus 10 is 20, so I take what 10% is equal to, I take my 4, and add 4 again, I end up at 8. If I want to go from 20 to 30%, I add another 10%, which is 4 kilometers, and so on. So I can get all my tens that way. So I'm going to quickly fill out the chart above by doing that. So if you notice, I know 40, 16. If I add 4 kilometers to that, that's going to give us our 50. 4 kilometers plus 16 is 20 kilometers. Okay. Now, if I add 4 kilometers, think of it as we're now skip counting by 4s. I add 4 kilometers to 20, 24 kilometers. 4 more, 28 kilometers. 4 more, 32 kilometers. 4 more, 36 kilometers. And if I add 4 to 36, I get my 40 kilometers. So that works out nice. Okay. Now, they want us to do 2 other parts. 4C. Now, technically, we could have found 50%. We found it using the tens. We could have found 50% using what our knowledge of 100% was. If I had 100% and we knew it was 40 kilometers, I just have to divide in half. I know that 50% is half of 100. So if I can find half of 40, so I divide 40 by 2. That's how we find half of something. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 times 2 is 4. Bring down the 0. 2 goes into 0 twice. It's 20. Half of 40 is 20 kilometers. And if we look back up here, that's exactly what we got for our 50. We got 20 kilometers. Now they also want us to find 25 and 75. Well, now that I have my 50%, I know that 25% is actually half of 50. So I know 50% is equal to 20 kilometers. To find 25%, I just need to half 50. If I half 20, so 20 divided by 2, I'll quickly do this for you, is 10. So I know that 25% of this trip is 10 kilometers because I just halved my 50. So my 20 right here is 10 kilometers. That's what 25% of the trip is. Now here's the tricky part, the 75%. Now, 75% can be compared to 50. Think of it like adding. Actually, you know what we'll do? I'll get rid of this 50 down here. We'll just go back to the original question. So I have my 50 and my 25. I know how much 50 is, and I know how much 25 is. If I add 50% plus 25%, that gives me 75%. So what is 50% equal to? 20 kilometers. And what's 25 equal to? 10 kilometers. 20 plus 10 is 30 kilometers. So 75% is equal to my 30 kilometers. So I go back up here, and this is 30 kilometers. We've now figured out every part of this trip.